Elden Ring offers one of the most customizable experiences in a From Software game to date. There are many options that you can choose to make your character unique and powerful, but this can also make it difficult to decide what to focus on. For this guide, we're talking about creating a bleed build. And yes, we will be showing areas of the map from the endgame, so consider this your spoiler warning. If you don't know how blood loss works, basically it's a status effect that builds up until it fills an enemy's bleed bar. Once filled, a flat percentage of damage is dealt to the character instantly. Taking 15 to 20% off of an enemy's health bar in the early game may sound helpful, but when enemies later in the game have thousands of health points, 15 to 20% is a game changer. You can increase your own resistance to blood loss by increasing your robustness stat, and to increase damage you can stat into Arcane. Arcane increases blood loss buildup on your weapons, as well as your chance of finding good stuff when enemies die. Pair this with 1 or 2 weapons that strike fast, and you'll be building bleed on your enemies in mere seconds. When you pair a high arcane stat with a weapon that not only causes bleed buildup, but also scales its damage with your arcane stat, your damage will be lethal to any who stand in your way. It's going to take us a while to get to this stage though, so let's begin with some tips for those that want to utilize bleed when just starting in the lands between. Bandit is a great bleed starter class. Their great knife deals a small amount of bleed, and they also start with a high amount of dexterity and arcane. Many weapons that offer bleed damage require dexterity as well, so it's a good idea to have some points in dexterity and arcane as you go forward. The stats that you will want to focus on the most are Vigor, Dexterity, and Arcane. Because you will get up in your enemy's face regularly, you're likely to take a decent amount of damage at points, so you want to mitigate that with a larger health pool. You can also level Dexterity and Arcane in tandem to increase your base damage with your weapons as well as how much bleed damage you will deal. Secondarily, keep a few points aside to put into Endurance in order to increase your stamina pool and equip load as needed. Once you've started the game, met Melina, and got your horse by hitting a few sites of grace, we need to access the basement underneath the gatefront ruins to find the whetstone knife. You can follow this path from the mapstone to find the stairs. This lets you change the Ashes of War on your weapons at any site of grace, which we will use later. The weapons that make this build sing are the double curved swords, which have unique jump attack and sprint attack animations that allow them to slash 3 to 4 times with one button press. This applies bleed in the blink of an eye. The curved swords that you find early on won't have bleed on them initially, but we can change that soon. Some of the strongest curved swords are in the Weeping Peninsula. At the Church of Pilgrimage, you can kill this skeleton who has a chance to drop the bandit's curved sword. If you don't get it, reload the area at the church and try again until you get 2. This can take a while, so maybe put on a podcast. If you're not keen on grinding for a lucky drop, the best way to start with dual curved swords is to use the warrior class, but we would recommend spending the time on the bandit swords nonetheless. In East Limgrave to the south is Fort Height. There you can find part of the Dectus medallion, which is important for later, but that's after fighting this Blood Knight. This enemy hits hard, but if you take them down, you will be rewarded with the Bloody Slash Ash of War. Using the whetstone knife that we got earlier, you can now apply a bleed affinity to your weapons by giving them this Ash of War. This also gives the weapon Bleed Buildup. This will usually weaken the weapon's damage output to balance out the blood loss effect, but at this stage of the game, the trade-off is worth it. While you're nearby, make sure to stop by the Third Church of Marika and grab the Flask of Wondrous Physic. This is a customizable flask that will be useful throughout your entire journey, but we're going to need it for something specific later on. To put Bloody Slash on both of your swords, you'll need a Lost Ash of War. The easiest one you can grab early is sold by this merchant in the Weeping Peninsula for 3,000 runes. Once you've got it, head to Round Table Hold and talk to the blacksmith to duplicate Bloody Slash. Now you can have this Ash of War equipped on 2 weapons at once, making your swords deal plenty of bleed damage. We'll be using these types of weapons for the rest of the video, but if you're looking for other types of bleed weapons early in the game, we would recommend the Flail, Hook Claws, Bloodhound's Fang, or the Reduvia Knife. You can find details on where to find these in our guide on IGN. It also bears mentioning that you'll need to be upgrading your weapons with smithing stones at Round Table Hold. If you need any help upgrading your gear, we have a dedicated video guide to help you find more smithing stones throughout your playthrough. Now that we have our weapons, let's start complementing them with our equipment. From the Rampart Tower in Stormvale Castle, head to the roof, taking out the exiles in your way. Follow this path to descend across the roofs until you find this secluded courtyard. Watch out for this firebird's attacks before climbing the nearby building. Defeat the enemies and then climb the ladder of the tower to find the Claw Talisman. This talisman, when equipped, will increase the damage you deal when landing jump attacks. This increases the damage of the dual sword's already potent jumping attack. When you're ready to take on Caelid, at roughly level 50, there's a helpful incantation that can be found behind Fort Gale. You'll have to get past this red-maned knight, his gravity arrows, and an army, but once you do, head around behind the fort to find these siege engines. In between them is the incantation Flame Grant Me Strength. This incantation raises your physical and fire damage for 30 seconds after you cast it. Now that's not a long time, and it takes a while to cast, so it's better used leading up to a fight or before a boss. It does require you to have 15 points in Faith, and you will need a seal to cast it, but you can buy a finger seal from the Twin Maiden husks in Round Table Hold. While you are in Caelid, you can grab a very powerful talisman. This area can be tricky though, so don't be afraid to come back here later. Radagon's Soreseal can be found in Fort Faroth, which is also where the second half of the Dectus Medallion can be found. Run straight through the dark belly of the fort and immediately up the ladder. Once up there, watch out for the red-maned soldier spirits spawning on the roof. Descend into this hole, attack this rat through the wall with Bloody Slash, and then make this jump. Take out the remaining rats, drop down this hole, and pick up your prize. Radagon's Soreseal raises your vigor, endurance, strength, and dexterity by 5 points each. That's 20 free levels right there. The only downside is that you do take a bit more damage. Now that we've covered the first few areas of the game, let's talk about what you can find once you reach the Altus Plateau. We would recommend that you are between levels 75 to 100 for the following tips. You will also need to have defeated Starscourge Radahn in Redmane Castle in order to gain access to one of the upcoming areas. We're going to grab a weapon which is the star of this build, the Scavenger's Curved Sword. You can find this in Mount Gelmir, on the approach to Volcano Manor. From the first Mount Gelmir campsite Site of Grace, head through the battlefield and across the rock bridge. On the other side, you'll be confronted by a grafted Scion. At this stage of the game, you may be able to go toe-to-toe with this mess of a monster, but you can also just ignore it and pick up this item off the ground. This is the Scavenger's Curved Sword. This sword is unique as it is a high damage curved sword that inflicts bleed innately. For now, we won't be able to customize it too much, but we will in the endgame. In the meantime, we recommend that you replace one of your curved swords with this new one once you have upgraded it to your current maximum. Another mid-game bleed weapon that you can find now is Eleonora's Poleblade. You can unlock this by defeating Eleonora at the Second Church of Marika in the Altus Plateau. We're going to stick with our curved swords, but we wanted to point out this option for you because of its wicked weapon ability. From here, ride west to this lake, and then ride north to discover the Sage's Cave. This is a winding cave full of illusory walls, but if you follow this path, you will find this chest, which is holding the Raptor's Black Feathers chest piece. This chest piece boosts your jumping attack damage, which will be useful for our endgame build. Also, there is another Lost Ash of War in this cave, which we'll be needing for later. Once you have made it inside Lanedale and have activated the Avenue Balcony Site of Grace, we can find a talisman in the nearby sewers. In the village under the Dragon's Wing is a well. Go down there and open the gate to find the subterranean shunning grounds. Just past this ladder is a Site of Grace, but watch out for these omens, they pack a punch. Head down this ladder on the right hand side and descend the pipes to the floor below. Unfortunately, there are two of these lobsters from Leonia here. You can either take them out or just run past them. To the south is an opening in the wall which will take you to the Lanedale Catacombs dungeon. This is quite a labyrinthine dungeon which we have a complete walkthrough for in our guide on IGN.com. Defeat the boss at the end of this dungeon to receive the Lord of Blood's Exultation. This talisman is worth the effort it takes to get it, because it increases your damage when someone is afflicted with blood loss nearby. Luckily for us, that will be nearly 100% of the time, so this talisman is a must-get for any bleed build. Finally, once you have defeated Radagon, a new area of Nokron will be opened up to you to explore. Go to the impact site in Limgrave and descend into Nokron. It's a straightforward path through the ruined city to get to this boss fight, the Mimic Tier. Once they are defeated, walk across the sky bridge until you reach this grassy field. Stick to the left-hand side, and soon you will find a Site of Grace overlooking Night's sacred ground. Jump across the rooftops and fight some more Mimic Tiers along the way before crossing this crumbling archway and dropping into this temple. This body slumped against the pedestal is holding the Black Whetblade, which is a vital piece of equipment for our endgame build. Incidentally, while you're here, behind this stone sword gate is the infamous Mimic Tier Ash Summon. It might be worth grabbing now so that you can call on it later if you choose. We're nearly ready to discuss the final form of this bleed build, but it will require you to have access to almost every area in the game. This means you need to have defeated the Runebearer in Lanedale and climbed the mountaintops of the Giants. You will also need to have found the optional area of Miquella's Halig Tree, which involves a lengthy side quest and some key items. But don't worry, we have a dedicated guide video to help you find your way to the Halig Tree too. We're ready to bring together some key pieces of the puzzle now that we have access to all areas of the game. In terms of our stats, it's important to continue to scale your health as you progress, so aim to have your vigor at around 40 to 50 points. You will want more stamina as the game progresses, so try to have a medium amount of endurance at roughly 25 points. Arcane should be as high as you can get it once your dexterity is around 30 to 40. But once you unlock the occult affinity for your weapons, you can respec some excess dexterity points directly into Arcane to boost your damage and bleed buildup. You will also need your faith at 15 for Flame Grant Me Strength. You may choose to balance these stats differently, if you would prefer to have more stamina for more successive hits, for example. But having that vigor and Arcane as high as they are is an important step for this build. If you've spent points in a skill that you wish you had put elsewhere, you can speak to Renala after finishing the Rhea Lucaria Academy to redistribute your points for the cost of a larval tier. You can find several of these in Nokron. Our first destination is in the mountaintops of the Giants. East of the Freezing Lake Site of Grace is an invisible teardrop scarab. Do your best to time your attacks to unlock the Seppuku Ash of War. This is a skill that empowers your weapons with extra bleed buildup for a limited time, at the cost of a bit of health. Equip both your Scavenger's Curved Sword and Bandit's Curved Sword with this Ash of War, and grant them the occult affinity with your Black Whetblade, so that they get more damage from your arcane stat. Incidentally, to the south of this lake is a church where you will be invaded by Bloody Finger Okina. Defeating Okina gives you the Rivers of Blood katana, which provides excellent bleed damage if you want an endgame alternative to our dual curved sword setup. With your weapons using the occult affinity, they will have less bleed buildup on them, but this is supplemented when using Seppuku. If you don't want to be casting this Ash of War for the bleed effect, then you can use the blood affinity, but your overall damage output will be hindered as a result. Now that our weapons are sorted, let's discuss armor. We already showed you how to get the Raptor's Black Feathers chest piece, which increases your jump attack damage. After this, the helmet that we recommend that you use is the White Mask. To unlock this mask, you will need to find your way to Mogwyn Palace. You can do this by approaching this transporter at the western edge of the consecrated snowfield, or by completing Vare's side quest. Once here, get past these Albinorics, turn left to enter the lake, take out this bird, and then approach the cliffside nearby. You will be invaded by a nameless white mask, who will drop their white mask for you when you defeat them. This mask gives you bonus damage once you inflict bleed on an enemy, which works in tandem with Lord of Blood's Exultation, meaning that you will be dealing even more raw damage once you inflict the bleed status on an enemy. For your arms and legs, the best armor that you can equip are the pieces that will protect you the most while allowing you to still medium roll based on your carry capacity. Also, while you are in the consecrated snowfield, to the east lies a minor Erd tree, guarded by a putrid avatar. By defeating this putrid avatar, you will unlock the Thorny Cracked tier. When mixed with your Flask of Wondrous Physic, this will further increase your attack damage when dealing rapid and consecutive strikes. For our talismans, we will use Lord of Blood's Exultation, the Claw Talisman, Radagon's Soreseal, and then either the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia or Millicent's Prosthesis. We've shown you how to get these first three in this video already, but we haven't found those last talismans yet. To receive them, you need to follow Millicent's full quest line, which you start in Caelid. This is a long and winding quest, so to see all of its steps, please refer to our guide on IGN. As you follow her quest through, she will travel from Caelid to the Altus Plateau and eventually make it to Miquella's Halig Tree. Once in Elphael, you can find an area where you can either be summoned to support Millicent, or summoned to challenge her. Defeating Millicent will give you Millicent's Prosthesis, which increases your attack damage after successive attacks and gives you a bonus 5 points of dexterity. If you assist Millicent, you'll be rewarded with the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia, which doesn't come with a stat bonus, but it does increase your damage after successive attacks more than Millicent's Prosthesis does. We'll leave the decision up to you depending on which you prefer, but we went with helping Millicent. Now that the puzzle is complete, here is the order of operations to use before you start a fight. To begin, we drink our Flask of Wondrous Physic imbued with the Thorny Cracked tier. Then, we cast Flame Grant Me Strength. Next, hold your left sword with 2 hands, use Seppuku, swap to holding both swords, and then use Seppuku again on your right hand weapon. It's important you do it in this order so that you don't clear away the Seppuku buff. This imbues both swords with bleed damage, and the immediate blood loss that you suffer will trigger Lord of Blood's Exultation, giving you an increase in base attack damage. We have boosted our jumping attack damage with our chest piece and the Claw Talisman, making our quadruple slash jump attack deal as much damage as possible. These fast, successive hits trigger bonus damage from Thorny Cracked tier and Millicent's Prosthesis or Rotten Winged Sword Insignia, and then, when we deal bleed damage on our enemies, our damage goes up even further thanks to White Mask. This build becomes so powerful based on Seppuku and the swift strikes of dual curved swords that even when bosses are immune to blood loss, your character's base damage can still take them out. One of the drawbacks of a bleed build is that it can lose some of its potency the longer a singular fight continues on. If for whatever reason an enemy doesn't go down in the first minute or two, the Seppuku buffs and Flame Grant Me Strength buff will dissipate, meaning that you won't be able to deal as much raw damage as you could at the start of a fight. This build can become even stronger on New Game Plus, or Journey 2 as it is called in-game. You can only get one Scavenger's Curved Sword per game, but if you pick up a second one on New Game Plus, it's definitely the best way to run this build to use both of them. You can also use New Game Plus to get the other option of Talisman from Millicent's questline, allowing you to equip both of them at once for even more consecutive strike damage. And that's about it! We weren't able to cover every helpful early game piece of equipment, but if you want to explore your options, you can look up how to find the Green Turtle Talisman and Winged Sword Insignia Talisman in our guide on IGN. Let us know if you use this build yourself, or if you would include any other buffing spells, weapons, or Ashes of War for your own spin on a bleed build. Be sure to check out our guide for reaching Miquella's Halig Tree if you haven't already, or our video on From Software's recurring in-joke, Patches the NPC. For everything else Elden Ring, keep it here on IGN.